Welcome, and first of all, just want to let you know that I am by no means a speech and language therapist, but I have previously been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work in early year settings and primary schools, supporting children and young people. Mainly, my background is working with neurodivergent young people, but also with other children with different communication styles. So hopefully today, I'm going to talk you through some examples of my experiences. I've also got a neurodivergent family, so different communication styles that I live with every single day, and different social skills and interaction styles. So I'm going to share my experiences and some of the strategies that have worked for my family and the young people I've supported, and hopefully you'll find it useful. I am going to focus on neurodivergence in particular because that's my area, but what I would say is a lot of the strategies that we're going to talk about can be used, and applied to most children. So take what is useful to you and leave what isn't really. If you do have a child that does have some specific or some significant social communication difficulties and social skills interaction difficulties, then please take that up with a referral to speech and language. But hopefully, if nothing else, you'll take some ideas, some tips from today. So without any further ado, so for me, I like to take a strength-based approach to early intervention. So particularly thinking about when we're understanding neurodivergent conditions, I feel that it's really important to recognise that every single child brings their own unique strengths, their own unique perspectives, and that's no different when we're talking about communication, interactions and socialising. So they will all have their strengths and their challenges as obviously, but I think quite often we tend to focus on the challenges, and I'm very much about taking that strength-based approach. I do feel that our children contribute to the diversity and experience in terms of the ways we communicate and interact, and I find that our young people are really innovative. I think they're refreshing, I think they're insightful and creative in how they communicate. So, and certainly the children and young people I work with, my own children, never cease to amaze me at their creativity in terms of being able to communicate and interact. It might not look the same as the majority, might not look the same as what we typically expect, but certainly there are lots of positives in terms of how they interact. So early intervention isn't about, for me, it's not about fixing children, but about supporting their strengths, about providing opportunities for growth and building really on their natural abilities. The aim is really to nurture confidence, nurture autonomy, nurture connection, and support children to thrive. So hopefully, that's what you'll get from today's session. You'll see how very much around that strength-based approach, that positive attitude towards communication, interaction. Thinking about neurodivergent communication and social interaction. So it's important to understand for me that, and I think we're certainly moving to this mindset nowadays, but it's not about there being anything wrong with young people. Like I've said, it's not an error, it's not a disorder, it's just natural variations in how young people are expressing themselves and how they connect and communicate with others. So just like we've all got unique personalities and preferences, our neurodivergent children, they'll communicate in ways that are suited to their needs and their perspectives. They've got their own communication style or their own communication profile. So basically, they just have a different way of communicating and interacting. It's different, not necessary. It's not less. Neurodivergent communication styles, whilst they will, often differ from typically what is expected, it doesn't make them less valid or less effective. Okay, so for example, some young people might prefer direct, clear language. They may avoid small talk because they just don't find it meaningful. Certainly my son, who's autistic, he certainly prefers to be very direct, very clear, specific language, doesn't see the point in small talk, and finds it quite meaningful, and doesn't really know why we ask questions about the weather. I find myself doing that sometimes at the beginning of presentations when I'm waiting to start and there's a group of people just sort of making small talk. For him, it's just not important. And also for some of our young people, you know, they might just be sort of really fast paced as well, you know, frequently moving on to other things. And again, that's not necessarily the wrong way to communicate, just different. So we need to really move away from the idea that there's one way, one right or one normal, I suppose, way to communicate or interact socially. And I think really it's about respecting differences. For me, communication is a two-way street. Certainly in my household, I'm the only neurotypical person in my household. And what we do is, you know, we've all got our own unique ways of communicating. And so what we do is we support each other's strengths. I find that for me, my family are very creative in the way they communicate, and my role is about nurturing and supporting those differences, really. So social interaction is a spectrum, really. Social preferences will vary widely, and for our young people, you know, they may prefer different types of interactions to what we're used to. Sorry, my slides, it just let me catch these up. They didn't move the way I expected them to then. Sorry about that. So thinking about what do the communication, these social skills look like for our young people. So like I said, there can be a wide variety of ways for our young people to communicate and interact. And some examples that we might see. So we might see for some young people that they've got advanced language. They might develop language skills quite early and have a really strong vocabulary or ability to speak in detail about quite complex topics, might be really articulate, but then may well struggle, for example, with the more social aspects of conversation. So thinking about things like back and forth conversation, back and forth exchanges, reading social cues, for example. Some young people may have language delay. So we can see that they experience that delayed language development, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the inability to understand language, but it might be that they just need a longer period of time, I suppose, to develop verbal communication skills. Some of our young people may well be non-speaking. So they may be, you know, have no language, or they may have minimal language. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't got anything to say, it just means that they may communicate through alternative methods. So it might be for some young people they use maybe sign language or picture exchange, for example, PECs, or even technology. So assistive technology on communication devices may well be used. Some of our young people might be very direct, literal, honest. So saying exactly what they mean, often without filtering for any sort of social conventions, and, you know, not really worrying about whether it's coming across as polite or not. Certainly my son is very direct, literal and honest. So he'll point out factual things that others might really consider are not appropriate to point out, and he's not being rude, but he's just making simple direct observations. Non-verbal communication. So many might rely on non-verbal communication. So maybe rely on gestures and facial expressions, body language. But alternatively, some of our young people might find it really difficult to interpret that non-verbal communication as well. Eye contact, for quite a lot of our young people, they can find eye contact difficult or uncomfortable or overstimulating. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to avoid it completely or entirely. So both of my children, you know, they can give eye contact, usually with people that they are very familiar with and comfortable with. For others, they wouldn't necessarily give a lot of eye contact. They may sort of glance, but that's it. So we can see that, you know, that eye contact is maybe limited, reduced, or they don't give it at all. So not necessarily, it's not a sign of not being interested or a sign of disengagement, but just a different way of focusing or even being able to process information. Processing time. So for some of our young people, they might need time to process information. So, they hear what we've said, but they just need time to sort of digest that, process that, and then formulate a response, particularly if it's in a group setting or if it's quite a sort of fast-paced interaction or environment. So they might just need a little bit longer to respond to questions or instructions, for example, and we might need to be really patient and give them that time without rushing or interrupting a game. That's just something in our house that happens, part and parcel of our communication styles. My son explains it as buffering. So he says when he needs a bit longer to process what's been said. He's like the computer screens when you put too many requests in, you get that little whirligig thing and your computer's buffering. So he said he's buffering when he needs that additional processing time. Visual, passion-driven, creative. So for some of our young people, they really thrive when they can maybe engage visually or creatively, have intense passions or interests really, and maybe they have particular topics that they are really enthusiastic about. And so quite often, if we encourage them to explore those passions, and especially in those sorts of creative or visual ways, then that can be a really helpful way to support communication and self-expression for some of our young people. Some of our young people might have a real sense of justice. So, things have to be fair. Maybe they sort of need to stick to the rules. And when something isn't right, when something feels wrong, if something feels unfair, then they are potentially likely to point that out with usually blunt honesty, and so when others won't speak up, they're the first to say something. So we can see that as well. Oh, and sorry, non-traditional play, and then he moved on then. So non-traditional play, we can see that as well. So, for example, we might see young people who engage in repetitive type play. For my little girl, this is how she plays. So again, that play might be driven by those intense passions or because of certain interests or topics. And again, this isn't wrong. It's just a different way of learning, different way of exploring, different way of having fun as well. So our child's sort of communication style is part of their individual strengths and uniqueness. Thinking about some of the differences and challenges. So our young people may well sort of approach social situations in ways that certainly differ from our expectations. And certainly where, my son's an adult now, and I know certainly when we were on our journey through his assessment, for us it was sort of discovering how his social interactions and his sort of social skills differed from what I expected, I suppose. And so thinking about what they might look like. So first of all, initiating social interactions. For some of our young people, they might find actually starting and initiating those social interactions can be quite difficult, maybe not entirely comfortable with starting conversations or joining in activity, or in particular group activities. Sometimes it can feel a bit awkward or confusing. So my little girl really struggles with joining into group activities. She's just not quite sure how to do that, how to initiate that. So it can be like not knowing how to break into a conversation, so that can be quite difficult. For some of our young people, it can be the opposite. Actually, for some young people, it might be that they quite literally just, gun ho, jump into those conversations, quite, seem to be quite abruptly, sometimes sort of interrupting the conversation, not because they mean to interrupt the conversation, but they want to get involved and they want to contribute. So again, just a difference in terms of how they manage and initiate those social interactions. Reading social cues, so being able to read social cues like body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and that can be really difficult. are quite complex, really. Again, something that my son really struggled with for a long time. Something that he's sort of improved and picked up on as he's got older and as he's matured. But certainly when he was younger, it was something he really struggled with. He struggled to interpret cues, for example. So he sometimes wouldn't understand or might not realise, for example, if someone was joking versus being serious, or if he was engaged in a conversation about something he was interested in and somebody wanted to change the topic of conversation for him, that could sometimes be something that he didn't pick up on, those indirect signals, I suppose. Conversation styles. So for our children, they often communicate in ways that, again, just different to what we expect. So literal and direct communication, I've mentioned, being very literal, maybe in their language, saying what they mean, no nuances, no, sort of no sarcasm, no irony, just saying it as it is. Monologuing sometimes, so particularly if young people are focusing on a topic of their own interest, so we might find that that's what they prefer to talk about quite frequently. Again, for my children, they'll happily talk about what they're interested in at that time, their special interests, their specific topics, and then can find it difficult to move on to other subjects. We might see so difficulties with that topic switching, really. Social boundaries, so again, understanding things like personal space. Okay, so we're thinking about those social interactions. For some of our young people, they might seem to invade personal space, get too close to others without realising that it's uncomfortable, or actually they may need a lot more personal space. In terms of physical contact, particularly for our young people, if they've got those sensory sensitivities, they might find physical contact like hugs or handshakes really overwhelming. Again, this is something that I had to speak to my family about, because within our family, hugs and kisses when you greet people, when you say bye to people, was the norm, was the expectation. In the broader family, in the wider family. And for my children, that is something that they really struggled with in terms of those social skills and those social interactions. So it was something that I had to speak to our family about, because that was their expectation. But for us, it needed to look different. So we might have to do that. And for some of our young people sort of struggling with the unspoken social rules as well. Also thinking about understanding social hierarchies and friendships, that can sometimes be difficult. So our young people might have different understandings of friendships and those social hierarchies. For some of our young people, we find that they might have fewer but really close friendships and prefer those sort of one-on-one friendships. But again, some young people might be comfortable to have lots of friends, but not necessarily engage in sort of in-depth relationships. My son has friendships, but he doesn't feel a need to engage in those friendships on a daily or even weekly basis. It's something that he kind of dips into and out of when it sort of suits him. For some of our young people, they might sort of struggle as well in terms of maintaining friendships, and just because of those differences in communication styles, because maybe they come across as really blunt, or maybe they are quite impulsive or forgetful, or struggle with maybe sometimes managing their emotions at times, they get overly excited. And so sometimes they can find that within friendships there can be some challenges around navigating that. So navigating social situations. So for some of our young people, managing those social settings due to differences with understanding, with processing, and responding to social dynamics can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. Understanding those unwritten social rules, like I've mentioned, might find group interactions really difficult, like I said, and prefer those one-on-one interactions. Also thinking about transitions within social activities. So, you know, they may find it really difficult moving maybe from one activity to another, or from one social setting to another. Thinking about our young people in particularly in early years, for example, or in school in general, switching from one activity to another, switching from free play to a structured group activity, for example, that might be really stressful for our young people and might need some more additional support around that, I suppose. And then emotional regulation in social settings. So again, for our young people, they might experience overstimulation. So if they are in busy settings where there are lots of other young people, crowded playgrounds, for example, particularly if they experience those sensory sensitivities, then they can experience that sensory overload and become overstimulated. If they become overstimulated, then they may well struggle to regulate those emotions. So we might see young people becoming anxious, becoming overwhelmed, even shutting down. Thinking about preferred communication methods. So again, you know, our young people may have different ways of communicating. So it might be that they use communication aids. Maybe they've got speech delays, or if they are anxious, for example. So when my little girl is anxious, she becomes situationally mute. So she isn't, even though she has language, she isn't always able to access that language when she's feeling overwhelmed or she's feeling anxious. So then she needs alternative ways to communicate, and she'll often rely on gestures, on body language as well. And she has in the past relied on communication boards as well. Some young people might rely on assistive communication. So just thinking about how we support those non-verbal communication styles. For some of our young people, they are visual thinkers and prefer visual communication even when they have the language. So it might be that they prefer to use pictures, they prefer to use symbols or written instructions, for example. Also thinking about young people who are literal or maybe struggle with detecting sarcasm or jokes. For some of our young people, we might see that they don't pick up on sarcasm, irony, or jokes, and then can struggle and find some social interactions may be confusing, and they might prefer that sort of honest and direct language. So as well as using that honest and direct language, for some of our young people, if they struggle with that, with taking language literally, with that sarcasm, then it might be that they prefer us to communicate in that very direct and honest way as well. Starting to move on to think about, you know, ways in which we might be able to support our young people in terms of supporting their communication. So, supporting the development of their ability to navigate social settings, to help them to build confidence, to help them to develop their communication, to help them to develop their interaction skills. So I always think, first and foremost, one of the key things is, and certainly again for my children, to make sure, first of all, you know, have you got their attention? Before we are, you know, speak to them, before we give them instruction, before we are engaging in conversation, you know, make sure that you've got their attention. You may well need to say the name. I know certainly where I used to work in an early years setting, and for one young person in particular, when we used to sort of give a group instruction, for example, if we didn't use his name first, he didn't realise that we were including him in those in that group direction, in those group instructions. So he wouldn't get up and complete those instructions. So it might be that you need to let your young person know that you are communicating with them, that you're speaking to them, get their attention, say their name. You know, it might be that you sort of have to gently touch them on the shoulder to make sure that you've got their attention, particularly if they tend to hyperfocus, so become really involved in what it is they're doing. So say the name, you know, maybe gently touch them if that's appropriate. So sometimes using physical touch, that may be something that they struggle with. So if it's comfortable for your child, then let them know that you're about to speak. Say the name as well. That also helps them to then to not only just give your attention, but focus on exactly what it is that you're about to say. Also thinking about using clear and direct language. So keeping our language simple as possible, keeping it direct if we've got young people that sort of struggle with interpreting language. Avoid using rather things like sarcasm, avoid using idioms, use, for example, instead of saying things like, you know, pull your socks up. Like that's quite a common thing for us to say, isn't it? When we want people to get a move on or hurry up, come on, pull your socks up, get a move on. So thinking about, you know, being very clear in what we say and not using that type of language. So saying, you know, finish your breakfast now, we need to go, rather than come on, pull your socks on, get a move on. And also being sort of specific in terms of our language. So thinking about saying things like, instead of saying behave yourself, well, what does that even mean? When we say behave yourself, you know, in what way? Do they know what it is that they are doing that you sort of deem to be not acceptable, appropriate, what, you know, or what, that they shouldn't be doing it. So being specific about what it is we want them to do. So rather than saying behave yourself, you might say, can you sit still in your chair, for example. So for lots of our children, because they interpret that language literally, if we're indirect, then we can confuse them. If we aren't specific, then we can confuse them. Also thinking about modeling clear and direct communication. So demonstrating really how to communicate clearly and directly. So that's about us, you know, and giving those clear models, showing them how to do that, us using short sentences and specific words, us giving examples and showing how to help for clarification if they don't understand something, for example, and letting our young people know that it's okay to ask for more information as well. And so our young people would benefit from seeing us use clear, direct communication and being very specific. I break everything down as much as possible, particularly if it's quite a complex set of instructions, but I don't overload my children. I'll give them short, simple, clear, direct sort of instructions, for example. Allowing that processing time. So if we've got a young person that needs that additional processing time, so if your young person buffers the way my son says he buffers, you know, giving them that extra time to process that information and respond. Now, I certainly know for my son, sometimes that might be a couple of extra seconds, sometimes it might be a little bit longer. If he's particularly stressed, if he's particularly anxious or struggling, then he actually needs, he sometimes might go away and then come back, sometimes hours later when he's processed that. But because I know him and know when he tends to be struggling more than others, I allow for that. And I know it's not that he's ignoring me, and I know it's not that he's being rude. It's just that he does need that extra time. So giving a young person, we always talk about the 10-second rule. So, you know, count to 10. Slowly count to 10 to give them that extra time, but be conscious that sometimes they might need a little bit longer than that. Sometimes it might be, you know, shorter, but certainly taking the time to let them process those directions, pause, wait, and also try and avoid repeating the instructions and particularly too quickly, because quite often what we can find is it can cause overload. So for example, if I was to give my son instruction or ask him a question, and then I didn't give him enough time to process that instruction or question, And then I ask the same thing. If I repeated it, then for him, he has to start that processing of that question or instruction all over again. So just give them that extra time. Also thinking about using repetition. So maybe repeating instructions or key information to reinforce what's being communicated, allowing for that processing time, so it might be that I might explain to my son what is going to happen, for example, what the plan is, and then I will give him time to process that. And then maybe about 5 or 10 minutes later, I will go back to him. And sometimes what I'll do is I will ask him, if what is the plan, what are we doing, and then I will repeat sort of key parts that need to be repeated, or it might be that I need to repeat the whole thing again. But just sometimes having that repeated exposure to information can be really helpful. Repetition can really help cement understanding. I always back it up as well if I need to, by maybe writing down a bullet point list, or if it's a plan for the day, we'll have a schedule. But I'll always reinforce that, sort of using that repetition in terms of what the plan is, breaking down complex instructions as well. So like I said before, instead of giving lots and lots of instructions or long multi-step instructions, I tend to break tasks down into smaller, more manageable tasks. So for example, instead of saying to my little girl, for example, go and get ready for school, what I might say is I might break that down into sections. So I might say, go and put your socks on, and let her go and put her socks on. Go and put your shoes on, let her put her shoes on. Get your school bag, so she gets a school bag. So that rather than it being get ready for school, and that can be quite an overwhelming task in terms of just breaking it down to simpler instructions for her, so it's not overwhelming. She's able to process each instruction one at a time, and then the expectation isn't that she's going to remember multiple instructions, particularly when in the mornings when we're about to get ready, we're getting ready for school. It can be quite a stressful time anyway. School runs, I find, are always stressful. I've got to get her to school, I've got to get my son organised, I've got to get myself ready for work, I've got to get out. So it can be quite an overwhelming time anyway, when communication can be misinterpreted. So for me, by breaking down those instructions one at a time, then it means that they're more achievable, and the tasks are more likely to be completed successfully, and my little girl, she isn't getting out the house feeling stressed, and her confidence has been boosted. Supporting that visually, like I mentioned, so using visual supports to support those instructions, to support schedules. So we might have visual schedules that's going to say what's happening throughout the day. It might be that we have task lists, so thinking about getting ready in the morning. So it could be, so for me, I break those instructions down, but actually what you could do is break those instructions down either visually with pictures or with a list, and that can work really well for some young people, and particularly if we're thinking about supporting their independent skills as well. So thinking about whether we can support our young people visually. Also, once we've said something to our children, once we've communicated something to them verbally, it's gone. So by supporting that visually, again, we're giving them that sort of concrete information so that they know, and then they know what's happening next and what they need to do. We can also, I find really helpful using things like social scripts, and role play can be really helpful, particularly in, certain social situations. So this is something that me and my little girl practice all the time. when she goes to school. An example is when she goes to school, and on a Friday she has karaoke, and in school my little girl isn't as verbal as she is at home, because it's, you know, she can find the school environment quite overwhelming, so she doesn't tend to use as much language, or isn't as able to communicate as well in school as she is at home. So on the way to school, because she really loves karaoke club at lunchtimes, and she really wants to engage and interact with that, so we will practice all the way to school with our little social scripts. And for her, that social script might sort of just look like, you know, when she's asking what karaoke song it is, she'll usually let me know what song it is she wants to sing. So, for example, one of the songs she recently chose was Trolls, the Trolls song, and Trolls Just Want to Have Fun. So all the way to school, we were practicing her saying, Trolls just want to have fun. So we would say, when you go to karaoke, you can go to your teacher and say, can I sing Trolls Just Want to Have Fun, please? And then she would practice that, and all the way to school we would practice that social script, and we would role play that all the way to school on the Friday morning. The drive's about half an hour. When we first started that, we used to do it a couple of times a week before karaoke, because it was something that was important to her. She wanted to engage in that, so we tried. So sometimes using social scripts, using role play, can help our young people to practice for social interactions, and practice ways of communicating in a safe environment, really. So it might be, for example, that they have a script in terms of how to say hello to their friends at school, for example. So thinking about how we can build that in for our young people can be really helpful. Sensory breaks, I think, is something that is really important in terms of support and communication. So lots of our young people experience sensory overload in lots of everyday environments, and that can really impact on their ability to communicate. So I mentioned for my little girl, you know, in the school environment, she really, really does struggle with, so at home, quite verbal, able to express what she wants. She's also very creative, because she hasn't always got the language skills that she needs to articulate what she wants or what she needs or what she's trying to communicate. So then she uses lots of gestures. So today she's actually poorly at home, and she's just made me laugh, because she's laying in bed and she says, how about this, and started sort of wringing her fingers, and straight away I knew what she meant was, because she's got a sore throat, what she was trying to communicate with me, she didn't have the words to express it. She was asking me for a bell so she could ding me to whenever she wanted me. So you know, for her, even though she is quite creative and has some verbal skills at home, when she's in the school environment, she finds that quite overwhelming, and her ability to utilize those skills is massively reduced. So lots of our children can experience, if they experience sensory sensitivities in particular, they can experience that overload, which then impacts on their ability to communicate, their ability to interact socially with others. So for me, sensory breaks can really support communication and social interaction skills. So giving our young people those regular sensory breaks to be able to help them, give them time to be able to step away, I suppose, when they're in overwhelming environments, and just sort of reset. You know, maybe if they're starting to move up that stress response curve, they're starting to become overwhelmed, giving them that opportunity to take a break and sort of return to a sort of more regulated state. So as well, thinking about you know, maybe providing quiet space, and that doesn't necessarily mean to be just at home. It might be because, you know, they have been to the supermarket with you. It might be because family members visitors. So certainly, again, that's something my little girl struggles with. If quite a few people visit then that's something she struggles with, and she needs to be able to go and have that break. And if she doesn't, she becomes overwhelmed, and it hugely impacts on her ability to communicate. It might be visiting family members. It might be when they've engaged in a social activity. So thinking about providing sensory breaks to support that. Also, sensory breaks can really support communication. Physical movement is really great in terms of improving things like focus and the ability to pay attention. So thinking about activities like stretching, jumping, even squeeze and resistive type things can really support young people to regulate, which then means that they are better able to focus, pay attention, and then communicate more effectively as well. Support and emotional regulation, so sensory breaks are really good for that. So again, thinking about activities that support them to calm. So it might be that we teach them things like deep breathing, rocking, using waist equipment as ways to regulate themselves as well. Play and attunement is something when I worked in the early year settings, and when my little girl was younger and had severe communication and social interaction difficulties, and playing attunement is something that I found really helpful. It's a really powerful way really to support communication and social interaction. So the way this works is, first of all, what we want to do is we want to follow our child's lead. So we are letting them sort of lead the play. Letting them sort of choose what toy, or maybe what movement activity, or what sound, and whatever it is that they want to do, whatever game they want to engage in, we let them choose that. We let them have that control. And then what we do is we just sort of take a step back, we watch what they're doing, and then we will engage with them by mirroring their actions. So what we would do is we would sort of mimic what they're doing. This is particularly helpful if we've got young people who really struggle with social interaction. So when my little girl was younger, and lots of the young people I used to support in nurseries in the early year setting, I had a group of children, and my little girl really struggled with any type of interactions. So she would sort of play on her own, and really struggled to let anyone get involved in those interactions. So I used this. So I would follow her lead, play with whatever it was she wants to play with, and then I would so for example, if she had a car, for example, and she was pushing a car around, then I would get another car, and I would copy her actions. I would use the same language, the same sounds, do the same actions as what she was doing with the car. And then what that sort of did was, then it sort of let her know that I was interested in what she was doing. And it helped her to accept me initially, to sort of play, to interact alongside her. Then, so once she sort of accepted me and was happy for me to play in that way, then I sort of moved it up a notch. So what I did then was, I might sort of introduce something else. I might change slightly the way I played, or I might add in a new object, for example. So it might be that, when she was playing with the cars and we were pushing the cars backwards and forwards, then maybe I would introduce a ramp for the car to go up and down. So just adding something else. Or if she was playing, for example, with maybe the toy food items and pretending to cook, I might introduce another ingredient, for example, and put a new ingredient into the pan. So changing the play can introduce our young people to new ideas, new objects, new communication opportunities as well. And then also I would then comment and describe as well. So talking about, using scriptive language to say what was going on, sort of narrating. And I did this in a lot of things. So model on language, talking through, about saying, for example, oh, wow, it's a blue car. The blue car's going really fast. The car's going up the ramp. The cars coming down the ramp, so narrating exactly what we were doing. And so again, just giving her opportunities to expand on a vocabulary, really reinforcing as well the idea that communication isn't just about direct requests or direct instructions. There's other forms of communication. Stories can be really helpful as well in terms of supporting young people. So stories are fantastic, really can be used as multi-sensory ways to support communication and interaction for our young people. So gives structure, if we're using a story, also models language, and I think and builds on things like language and vocabulary. So stories naturally expose our children to new words, new phrases, new sentence structures, so helps to build their vocabulary and language skills. Also, I think as well, things like rhythm, repetition can make language easier for them to process. Stories also provide that sort of framework for social situations. So thinking about, characters in books. So quite often stories are about characters who are navigating social situations. So it might be stories about making friends. It might be resolving conflicts, working through sort of challenges. And so the books and stories can be used as scenarios really to help children learn how to interact with others and then how to recognize social cues and boundaries. So by giving examples, you're given sort of examples of how these characters would handle different social interactions. You can also build on that. So not just reading the story to explore that, but also for children that are able, pause and when you're throughout the story to ask questions, how do you think that character feels? What do you think's going to happen next? So encouraging young people to think about the characters, think about the situations, thinking about the social dynamics, thinking about emotions really, and build on that understanding. So really, stories are great for sort of simplifying complex social situations, making it easier for children to understand. When we're using stories, it's always easier if we sort of use stories that our children are initially interested in, so if they've got a specific topic, it doesn't have to be a book either. Make your own stories or be creative with your stories, and use a variety of books as well. And again, thinking about those repetitive type stories can be quite helpful. Story sacks rather can be really helpful as well. And like I say, multi-sensory in terms of the use of stories. Listening and attention is really important for effective communication. So important for learning, important for social interaction. So like I've already said, in terms of supporting listening and attention, first and foremost, we need to make sure we've got our child's attention before we're engaging with them, before giving instructions, before speaking to our child, make sure that we have got their attention in the first place, particularly like I said earlier, if they are engaged in something and they hyper focus in something, using that clear and simple language, being clear, being concise, and giving clear, concise instructions that are easy for our children to follow, particularly like I said earlier, if they struggle with processing time, processing language, if they've got those difficulties with attentional regulation. Visuals is something else that can support with listening and attention as well. So again, like I said, visuals reinforce what's being communicated, and then is a concrete representation of what we're asking, allowing that processing time, like I mentioned earlier as well. Thinking about, though, if you have got a young person that really struggles with listening and attentional skills, minimizing distractions. So if we're asking them to focus, concentrate, engage on something, think about what's going on in the environment around them. Is there something that is going to, particularly if they are easily distracted, is there something that is going to distract them? Is the environment overly stimulating? And can we reduce or minimize these distractions to support them? I remember once when I was accessing, it was actually a speech and language support group, and within the group, we were in a room where there was a computer, and my little girl just loved keyboards at that time. And so she just couldn't engage in the speech and language therapy group because all she wanted to do was get over to the keyboard. So thinking about what is happening in the environment, supporting our young people with things like movement breaks. So movement can really help young people to regulate, sort of to put their attention and their focus to be able to pay attention and listen as well. And breaking down those complex instructions can be really helpful. Thinking about how we can support social skills generally. So modeling, model those social skills. Our children learn by observation. They learn by sort of watching us, observing others, especially us as parents. So, model those social interactions, and demonstrate, model how sort of you greet people. With my little girl, what we tend to do is, particularly when we're working on something in particular, we tend to be a little bit overly dramatic, so she picks up on it more easily. So it sort of stands out when we're modeling things, and that really works for her. For some, we could use social stories. So social stories are kind of short, simple narratives that explain social situations, and how they could respond. So a social story would kind of describe a situation, for example, describe or explain what they might be able to do in that situation, and what maybe the outcome might be. So, for example, when I want to play with someone, I can say, can I join in? If they say yes, I can play with them. If they say no, I can, and have an alternative activity for them. Practicing, so it's really going through those social stories, practicing those social scripts as well, like I mentioned earlier, practicing things that our children can, responses our children can use in sort of common social interactions. So like I said, for my little girl, we use social scripts for things that she really wants to be included in, she really wants to engage in, because she doesn't have those skills naturally, and so she'll let me know what it is she wants to do, and so then we practice those scripts to give her the confidence to be able to interact in those social situations. Also, sometimes maybe our young people can struggle with, for example, turn taking. So thinking about how we can develop turn taking. So just playing turn taking games can sometimes be helpful. Again, this is something that we practice all the time. So we'll play things like Jenga. So my little girl loves games where, there's going to be sort of a dramatic outcome. So when you play Jenga, everything falls down. So that's something that we do. But practicing those turn-based games can be really helpful, because they've got to practice waiting for the turn, that sort of back and forth as well. And then again, just sort of modeling and emphasizing, it's my turn now. After my turn, it's little Johnny's turn. After Johnny's turn, then it's your turn, and sort of narrating all of that as well. And then just thinking about some other general strategies, really. So clarifying our expectations for our young people, being clear and concise with our own communication, being specific with instructions, those, for example, rather than saying, you know, can you be more helpful, saying, can you please pick up your toys, you know, fostering that joint attention like I mentioned before as well. So encouraging activities where you can focus on the same thing, you can focus on the same games, you can have opportunities to build in that shared attention. Things like I Spy we really like, so you can use I Spy wherever you are, and that, you know, is a game that really builds on shared attention. So thinking about those types of things, follow their interests as well. There's no point in trying to do things if they're not interested, so and they're not going to engage. So where possible, use their interests to your advantage. Practicing flexibility in conversations. So that's basically, you know, again, thinking about things like practicing turn taking. Again, you know, also expanding on topics. If you've got young people that will want to talk about a specific topic all the time, trying to sort of build in other subjects. I find for my children, what we tend to do is initially we'll start off talking about what they're interested in, and then I will introduce something else, and then they're happy then to go to talk about something else. They quite often go back to what it is that they're interested in, but just sort of gently guiding them in terms of talking about other subjects, other topics. And then seeking a professional support as well, and fostering that positive and supportive atmosphere. So you know, for me, it's about celebrating your young person's achievements, giving regular praise as well, giving regular encouragement, avoiding negative language and criticisms as well. So trying not to discourage your child, and give them that praise, give them positive feedback, give them constructive feedback as well, and focusing on improvement and effort. You know, they may not necessarily achieve what we've asked of them, but they might have put a lot of effort into it. And then, like I said at the very, very beginning, if your child is struggling with communication, if they're struggling with their social interaction skills, despite sort of any efforts, then think about getting some professional help. So think about speaking to your teachers, your SENCO, your speech therapist, your occupational therapist, or your speech and language therapist as well, about some tailored strategies and tailored interventions to support your young person. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
That was brilliant. Thanks, Tracy. So much useful information there. As expected, we've had lots of questions coming in, so we'll just try and get through a few before you finish. So the first one is, if your child is autistic and being put into a social skills intervention group, what questions would you be asking school to ensure it's not simply perpetuating masking?
Oh, that's a really good question, isn't it, really? Just repeat that again for me, Molly.
Yeah, of course. If your child is autistic and being put into a social skills intervention group, what questions would you be asking the school to ensure it's not simply perpetuating masking?
Oh, I'm not really sure how I would answer that. That's really difficult. I'm not sure what you mean in terms of what questions would I be asking the school. I think really for me it's about understanding if they are masking, and then need is primarily for me is going to be about not standing out, trying to fit in, trying to sort of camouflage their differences. And suppose for me it's about, is that group something that is just going to reinforce the need to mask? So I would be asking, I suppose for me, I would be asking, you know, what is the outcome of the group? What is the aims of the group, I suppose? What other young people will be included in that group? Are they going to be focusing on how difference is is a good thing, how difference is something positive, something to be embraced, so that people don't feel that they need to mask. It's about addressing the reason for that masking, isn't it, really? And the reason is often that young people don't want to stand out. So simply putting them into one of those social intervention groups, it isn't necessarily going to support them to unmask, and masking is quite complex as well, so there's going to be so many layers to that. So for me, I would be addressing the reasons for the need to mask them rather than be simply popping them into a social intervention group. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Tracy. The next question is, and we've had quite a lot of this type of question. So, my son argues about me requesting he complete a task to be ready to leave using a clear, direct request. How can I manage this?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, my son argues about me requesting he complete a task to be ready to leave, I guess leaving the house, using a clear, direct request. How can I manage this?
Okay, so I would not make it a direct request. So first of all, we've had, it could be that you are, instead of saying, I need you to get ready so that we can leave the house now, instead of saying, it might be, go and put your shoes on because we're leaving the house now. It might be that you say, what do you need to do for us to leave? So you're putting that on them, you're sort of given them that responsibility to answer. And then, so if it's about the shoes, for example, instead of saying, go and put your shoes on, we need to leave the house, that's the direct request. It might be, oh, we need to leave now, what do you need to do? I need to get my shoes. Okay, then. And they go and get the shoes. So it's about changing how we communicate those instructions. Also, I've got a lot of families that find if it reminds us that, for example, come through Alexa or WhatsApp messages rather than it being a direct verbal request, sometimes that can be helpful. Or if they have a task list or a schedule and then they're redirected, so it might be we're leaving in 5 minutes. Have you checked your schedule? To see what you need to do next? So it's not you saying go and do this as a direct request. It's being sort of either reworded to be an direct request, or the request is coming from technology or from that schedule